welcome to Mental Health Matters. My name is Barbara Meyers, and I'm the host of the show. In this evening's show, we're going to talk about the movement for rights for mental health clients. It's sometimes called the consumer movement. And really delighted to have two people that have been part of this movement ever since it began, I think, or decades anyway. And we're very privileged to have them here still working in Alameda County on these issues. And so I'm really pleased to bring them here. First, I'd like to introduce Sally Zinman. She's a longtime mental health consumer activist, and she's a member of the Consumer Relations team, Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services.
Hi, how do you do?
Welcome.
Wonderful. Really glad to be here.
Next, I'd like to introduce Jay Mahler. He's the Consumer Relations Manager at Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services, and welcome.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to briefly explain the term consumer, because this word is used in context other than we're going to use it tonight. And I'd like to say that different words have been used to refer to people who have mental health difficulties or use mental health services. Sometimes the word client, or the term survivor, or the term patient, or the term consumer. And each of these is valid in its own context. The word consumer evokes the sense that the client has a choice over what will happen to them, and the mental health client movement is commonly called the consumer movement. So we're going to be using that word in today's show. To begin with, I'd like to have Sally and Jay each talk about their part in the consumer movement and what in their lives helped them to be so passionate about this issue. So first, Sally.
Well, what it was in my life that caused me to be so passionate was my own experience, which occurs with so many people. In 1971 to 73, I was in a mental health facility, and my treatment was so horrendous. At one point, I was in a cellar, what they called security room of an old farmhouse, with a 2x4 as the lock, in my underwear, sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I was allowed to go upstairs once a day with a man and a woman with me when I was in the bathroom, so I had no privacy. I was beaten by the doctor. It was horrendous. And even at that time, I knew that I would be back to do something about this, that I was watching, and that I couldn't do anything about it now, but there would be a time that I would do something about this. And I've heard that remark from many people throughout the this was over 30 years ago, many people over the last 30 years, whether they were in state hospital, whether they were zonked out with Thorazine or shock treatment, there's a part of you witnessing every single minute of it, and that you'll be back to do something about it. And we all did come back, and we joined together, and we started doing something about it. What we call it is the consumer movement, the survivor movement. It's really like, it is a civil rights movement. It's like the African American and gay and women's movement in terms of people coming together to change the mental health system, to change the mental health system to honor certain values and principles. I discovered the movement about 4 years after my own hospitalization. I changed my whole life goals after that experience. This became my life and my mission and my passion. And went to a conference that years ago we had no money, these sort of pioneers, or maybe 100 and 150 people at a conference at a campground. We hitchhiked to get there. When I came back, a neighbor said, "You look like you're in love. Are you getting married?" And I went, "Yes," because I found that I wasn't alone. There were people like me. We were coming together. They had the same values. They had the same experience. And I have to say that in my advocacy over these years has been my recovery. They are part and parcel of the same thing. I'm going to talk a little, if I have time, about the values that I shared with all these people at that time, because I think they are the same values and principles that we have today. We said them differently. We were very militant. We were outside the door decision makers because we were not able to be at the table. So we were with placards, in your face kind of militancy, very separatist as groups are when they come together to forge support groups and consciousness raising and to further their own rights. But one very, very strong thing, then it was being against forced treatment, and now we talk about being for self-determination and choice. That we have to have control over our own bodies and our own minds, and we know best what we need or don't need. And that has been an abiding principle. Secondly, then it was very, very furiously against inhumane treatment. The people that I met at that time had like 30 and 40 shock treatment and insulin treatments and hours and hours and days of seclusion and restraint. So basically to create a mental health system that did no harm. And today this is the human rights in the mental health system is something that we're still fighting for, and we haven't attained yet. But it is much better than those days, I think, because of our efforts and other advocates. Years ago we used to have something called saneism, just like racism or sexism. Now we use terms of stigma and discrimination, but that's something we've been fighting all these years, and we still are. These are things that this group of people in those campgrounds felt, and we still are fighting for the same things. We say them in a different way, but it's the same battle, the same gold ring in the Mount merry-go-round. They were very, very anti-medical model, almost on the verge of being anti-psychiatry, and some people were. But now we talk about holistic services, that we are not just a biological entity. A pill is not all we need. We need housing, we need jobs, we need friends, we need to have children and all the things that everybody else wants. Go to church, do all the things to support community, all the things that everybody else does, and that services should offer these things. They should deal with us as whole human beings, not just a medical entity. Connected to that, very interestingly, we used to talk about, well, it's going to take the mental health system years to do these things. But we already had support groups that were composed of just us, advocacy groups. Why don't we start our own programs? Self-help client-run programs. I mean, they didn't exist at that time. And this became a mission. And as you know now, there are self-help peer support programs across the country. Right. Two very powerful ones in Alameda County. I couldn't count how many in the state of California. Right. So this is an idea that emerged from this group of people. More than anything, I mean, if there's anything overriding everything that I've said, it's the concept, I have the button on, of nothing about us without us, although we may not have used that term at the time, that we shouldn't be outside with placards, we should be at the table all the time, that these decisions about mental health affected us more than any other group of people. They were about us, they were about our mental health services, that we had to be at the table at decision making, we had to be at the table to implement programs, we should be implementing programs, we should be running programs, we should be monitoring them, we should be evaluating them across the line. That consumers had to be involved in every single aspect of anything that had to do with mental health. And these values were then and they are today.
So to what extent has this been realized?
It's so little time to trace the things that have occurred since then. But if there's any one large thing that has happened is the involvement of consumers in the mental health system. Jay is in a position of a mental health manager within the mental health system, and that is a county position in many different counties. Many, many, many states have county consumers. They have consumers in management levels. Consumers are working in the mental health system at this time. There are self-help peer support programs across the state, across the country, which was a pipe dream that we had had.
Well, this is a lot of progress.
There were at the time on a single piece of paper they could list the self-help support programs. And we met via one newspaper called Madness Network News, all the fits that's news to print that was put out 3 or 4 times a year, and these campgrounds. And now there are three federally funded technical assistance programs to keep track of us and provide technical assistance for us. Their trainings, their conferences, we collaborate with the mental health system. The changes in rights protections, which were not there years and years and years ago in terms of the right to informed consent. It is not where I would like it to be, but it's certainly much further along than it was then.
Wow, thank you. We'd like to hear what Jay, because I know you've been involved also for many years. I'd like to hear how you first got involved. And
I'd be glad to do that. First, I want to congratulate you and your crew for your program getting an outstanding award from the Alameda County for the great work you're doing. I do have tremendous appreciation for the work the program does in getting the community to be more accepting for those of us with mental health issues. One of the most powerful ways for us to combat stigma is to tell our stories. And so I want to kind of first start sharing that I grew up in Hayward, California, and graduated from Hayward High, class of 64, and started Cal at Berkeley as an 18-year-old freshman and got involved in the free speech movement to try and end discrimination in housing for ethnic minorities. And after a couple of months at Berkeley and going without sleep for about 6 days, I had a nervous breakdown and spent the next 10 years in the public mental health system, 5 of those years receiving treatments that no human being should have to endure, kinds of things that Sally has been talking about. I was given shock treatments against my will. I was locked up for months at a time, in restraints for days at a time, on huge, huge amounts of medication. At the time I was in the hospital, I had no rights to have visitors, to have my family visit me, to make telephone calls, to wear my own clothes. These were all privileges that people had to earn at that time. And so that was a pretty horrendous situation to be through. And so at age 20, after being in psychiatric hospitals for 2 years, I was diagnosed as having chronic schizophrenia, undifferentiated, with prognosis poor, because I didn't respond to the treatment that well. And probably the worst part of that is I went through the radical transformation of being Jerry Mahler, a person who was a good student, had girlfriends, lots of friends, enjoyed playing basketball. I went from that transformation to being a mental patient, a person that felt so low about myself, didn't want to socialize with people. And so when I got out of the hospital last time, I went to my family home in Castro Valley and slept and stayed in my room for about 20 hours a day for over a year. And so I was going to Fairmont Hospital, which is in San Leandro, went there for about 8 years, and would see a doctor once every 3 months to pick up a bottle of pills, maybe saw him for 15 minutes. Thank goodness there was a funding cut in Alameda County where this psychiatrist actually lost his job. In order for me to continue getting the medication, I had to join a group therapy. That was the first time I had an opportunity to be with other people that had mental health issues. I also had a very good therapist named Dr. Moore. And so that was probably one of the first things that started me on my road to recovery, which took several years. Other things that were very helpful in my recovery was getting a job a few years later at this drugstore called Drug King. Got hired by Kelly Girls. That's another story in itself. Going back to school, majoring in psychology, where I was able to study other approaches like Jung and Maslow and Rogers instead of the medical model treatment that was so horrible for me. Actually, another thing was going to church every week to kind of get back my spiritual kind of connection. I think what I felt most cheated about in going through the mental health system was my spiritual and social experiences and realizations were totally denied and devalued by the public mental health system. So going to church was very significant for me to remake that connection with God. And so in 1972, this Dr. Moore, who was a very good therapist, encouraged me to join this Eden District Mental Health Committee, which was a group that was organized by a woman named Gail Still, who was like a mentor for me. So I joined this Eden District Mental Health Committee, and that was my beginning of being involved in the consumer survivor movement. In 1976, I formed a group called Mental Health Consumer Concerns, which was in Hayward, and to try and be the patient rights advocate. As Sally was saying, rights were so important to us, and so we wanted to have a consumer rent program to be the patient rights advocate. But there was no way that they were going to hire a group of former mental patients back in the 70s to be the patient rights advocate. So after 4 years of trying, not successful, we actually went over to Contra Costa County and were successful in being the patient rights advocate. So I'd actually been over in Contra Costa County for 26 years, and August of 2006, I had the opportunity to come back home to Alameda County. It was actually Mary Thomas and Barbara Majak. Mary Thomas is the mental health director for Alameda County, and Barbara Majak is the deputy director, who hired me to be on this consumer relations team and to be the director of the consumer relations team to make sure that consumers were meaningfully involved in trying to change the system. So they've been tremendously supportive. I think the final thing I just want to conclude with is to kind of share with you the 4 areas that kind of recognize nationally that consumers need to be involved with if we're going to meaningfully transform the system. And the first area is to be involved in systems change, to have consumers involved in developing, implementing, and evaluating programs and policies. And the pool of consumer champions, we're very fortunate to have that in Alameda County, because they're working extremely hard on that systems change effort. The second area that's real important is there needs to be consumer-operated programs in every geographical area, in every county. And Sally mentioned that we have 2 strong ones here in Alameda County. We have the Alameda Network of Mental Health Clients and Peers, which is another consumer-operated program. The third major area that consumers need to be involved to change the system or transform the system is consumers need to be hired as mental health providers. It's very important for people that have mental health issues to see other people in recovery. So kind of recognize that you need a critical mass of consumers working in mental health, and I'd like to throw out the figure of 25% of the mental health workforce should probably be people in recovery. And the fourth area that consumers need to be involved with is training and education. We not only need to be trained, we need to have the opportunity to help set the agenda on what the training is going to be, to prepare the training, to teach the training, as well as go to the training. And in the consumer movement over the last number of years, the 2 areas that we found the most important to emphasize on training is trying to move the system to a recovery vision, and also to help combat stigma and discrimination. Those are the 2 big areas that we really want to focus our training efforts on.
I think the consumer movement has been very successful in getting everyone to buy into the idea of a recovery-oriented. Of course, some of them have different ideas about what recovery-oriented means, but still, it's to get that vision came from the consumers. That
actually did.
Yeah. So.
And one of the people that promoted it, someone named Bill Anthony from Boston University, credits with the consumers around him, making him realize that yes, we do recover.
I'd like to ask Sally, where do you think the consumer movement is headed now? We have as you know, California has a Mental Health Services Act, and I guess I'd like to understand how that has impacted the consumer movement and where we think things are going.
Well, I think the Mental Health Services Act, which Prop 63, which people passed, I think, 2004, I believe. It taxes any income over $1 million, 1% of individuals. I think it's quite extraordinary because for me it's the hope for the future that our movement, consumer survivors together, are going to make the same kind of gains that we've made so far. Because basically, explicitly or implicitly, the Mental Health Services Act, if people read the whole thing, I don't know that they have, the public hasn't, really expressed those values that I talked about. They're there. It's basically voluntary, community-based services. That's what we were fighting for 30 years ago, and here it is in an act that was passed by the people of California.
The visionary.
It talks about it talks about holistic services, what they call full service partnerships is the word they use, but it's meeting people where they're at, get the needs they have at the moment, and they're across the board, the whole human being, of housing and social support and assistance with jobs and assistance with income. It's what we were talking about all those many years ago. Employment. The Act says that consumers and family members should be a major part of the mental health workforce as well as the trainers of that workforce. So it is just so incredible to see the things that we talked about 35 years ago come or be in this document. They haven't come to fruition at this moment. And it makes me realize that we have influenced mental health culture and at least the best thinking of mental health in the last 30 years.
I've been part of that process, and I've been really impressed with the fact that the county here, at least in Alameda County, has been very seriously taking that mission to really go out and find out what the needs are, going to the grassroots and taking that seriously. And
the Mental Health Services Act says that they have to include consumers and family members in all decision making and stakeholder groups. So that's part of what we've been talking about all this time. I wanted to read some things that are in the Mental Health Services Act because it's so incredible to me. It gives me hope for the future. When you advocate, although it is so important to advocate, to me advocating is hope. Hope is advocating. They're interchangeable. But day to day you can get very depressed and very upset, and it's always a struggle. But when you look at, I look at the Mental Health Services Act as a document, and I see in it the things that we talked about 35 years ago. I know that we've achieved something and that we will achieve more and more. Within the Act itself, it talks about planning for services shall be consistent with the philosophy, principles, and practices of the recovery vision for mental health consumers. To promote concepts key to the recovery for individuals who have mental illness, hope, personal empowerment, respect, social connections, self-responsibility, and self-determination. Well, we could have written that, To promote consumer-operated services as a way to support recovery. I already talked to you about the sort of band of very not many people sitting around and brainstorming about wouldn't it be wonderful if we had our own consumer-run programs, to reflect the cultural, ethnic, and racial diversity of mental health consumers, and to plan for each consumer's individual needs, and I would add is defined by that person. So I think the Mental Health Services Act is about transformation and captures the concept that recovery is possible for everyone. And I think the consumers have had a lot to do with changing the culture of the mental health system so they could see that as a vision.
It's very inspirational. And Jay, I'd like to, you mentioned briefly the Pool of Consumer Champions, and I know you're wearing a Pool of Consumer Champions t-shirt here. So I'd like to ask you about what is it, and if someone wanted to get involved, how would they get involved?
Well, I appreciate you asking that because I thought I might have to force my question to go to that area. But first of all, it's amazing to me what the Pool of Consumer Champions has accomplished in less than a year and a half, the dedication of its members and the tremendous growth. Currently, it's made up of 168 Alameda residents who have mental health issues. Its purpose is to help other Alameda residents who have mental health issues and to help transform the system. And to become a member of the Pool of Consumer Champions, a person needs to attend an orientation and also fill out an application. The structure of the Pool of Consumer Champions is made up of a steering committee and a number of other committees. Very proud that the Pool of Consumer Champions really makes a tremendous effort to reflect the diversity of the mental health consumer community in Alameda County, particularly ethnic diversity. And also the committee has a number of tasks that it works on, and just to kind of give you an example, the steering committee passed a recommendation, has worked hard to try and get 10% of the prevention and early intervention dollars out of the Mental Health Service Act that Sally was just referring to, the Pool of Consumer Champions organized a stigma conference. They organized writing a proposal.
Yeah, that was a nice conference.
Exactly, over 400 people attended. They went to community forums. They got on planning councils. I mean, they worked extremely hard to get this campaign for social inclusion. The other key recommendation the steering committee was really working hard for is to make sure that 50% of the Mental Health Service Act workforce dollars goes to hiring consumers and family members to help them be able to work in mental health. So that's just two examples.
That's really impressive. I know that
a lot of people are working hard.
Yeah, they have.
It's wonderful, I think, for Jay and I to see these are new people getting involved in the movement, and that the ball is thrown to them, and they will continue.
And they picked it up and they're running with it.
And they're running with it throughout the country. I mean, this is not an isolated thing. There's a very, very strong consumer movement throughout the country.
I just want to emphasize the hard work it takes. Kind of have a thought, don't agonize, organize. You know, nothing important comes easy. So when I talk about this, there's a lot of steps forward and steps back. There's agonizing times during this, you know, that we have to keep persevering.
So now what I'd like to do is leave the resources organizations. Jay was talking about the Pool of Consumer Champions for Alameda County. You see that on your screen. The next organization I'd like to point out is PEERS. PEERS stands for Peers Envisioning and Engaging in Recovery Services, and it's in Oakland, and that number's on your screen. The other advocate group in Alameda County is the Alameda County Network of Mental Health Clients. I'd like to thank Sally and Jay for being our guests, and how delighted I am that you're both here. I'd like to use these as closing words. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone. I want to thank you for watching.